Question 1. In what way does your media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? In our opening sequence, we used forms and conventions of real media products by researching into films of the genre we are studying. For our real media research, at the beginning of the process, we looked into the opening sequences of 5 thriller films of our choice. I looked at the openings for Fight Club, Zodiac, The Sixth Sense, Gone Girl and Memento. All these sequences were put together using different visual and audible elements. For example, Fight Club used a combination of voiceover and dialogue to introduce the characters. The film also starts with a scene from the end of the narrative and then flashes back to the beginning. This is conventional to the thriller genre as it creates suspense and builds tension to the main climax of the plot at the end of the film. This may make the viewer want to continue watching the film to find out how certain events unfold. Alternatively, films like The Sixth Sense and Zodiac started the film with a particular scene or event to introduce the themes of the film. Both of these included a shooting which immediately introduced the crime and mystery elements to the thriller genre. When we were brainstorming ideas for our opening sequence, we had ideas leaning towards the idea of a voiceover, but later decided to keep the audio of the opening minimal to none. We chose this as we felt that choosing a soundtrack that fit with our opening was more important and creative than dialogue from either character. It also effectively doesn't give away too much and builds tension. The soundtrack was conventional, as overlaid with the horror drone, it had an ominous and creepy vibe which conventionally created an increasing build-up of tension that had a crescendo at the plot reveal. When we chose our idea, we didn't want to blatantly copy other films in their style, and we didn't want to pick common and overused plots such as your average crime and murder mystery thriller, as they are repetitive and hard to pull off without realistic mise-en-scene. We wanted to go for a newer and more controversial narrative, which is why we were for a creepy twist on a classic stalker plot in which there was an element of predatory advances and paedophilia. The ways our opening sequence is similar to other films on the market is the use of ominous music and the visual effects such as the font of the credits. The character of the anonymous man and kidnapper remains an unrevealed identity in the opening sequence and has many conventional aspects to a thriller and as a character within this genre. We mirrored his behaviours and appearance with similarities to Howard from 10 Cloverfield Lane, who's an interesting character with similar motives to the abductor. However, much like in the film, the audience is misled to believe the character has good intentions or is a protagonist of some sort. Both Howard and our character are revealed to have bad intentions with the female characters. We used unconventional mise-en-scene for the antagonist to mislead the audience and make him initially appear like the teenage girl's dad, despite his true sinister role. We wanted our antagonist to have a realistic approach to his character to represent him as a human being and not an over-exaggerated monster, which is why our subgenre is psychological. As we only made the opening sequence of the film, the character developments and outcomes of his character motives aren't shown to the audience, but are implied through his mannerisms. In the opening sequence, Daniel's character established a number of enigmas within the plot, such as what the antagonist's intentions were and how his character knows or is related to Zanice. We used a number of micro-elements, specifically mise-en-scene, to establish his character, and this created suspense and questions from the audience that are later revealed. Zanice is a conventional character to the genre of the thriller and the film industry in general, as she is the victim of the narrative. However, it isn't very often that female is the protagonist and the main character of a film, so that challenges conventions. Room is a thriller film that has a female protagonist who is the main character of the narrative and is the victim. However, this character is much older, whereas we chose for Zanice to be a younger age in the teenager bracket, as we wanted the audience of teenagers to relate to her character. Although we used a seemingly happy soundtrack, which was an uncopyrighted cover of the song Happy Birthday Sweet 16, we overlaid a horror drone effect which gradually built up until the end of the sequence and climaxed at points of tension and created an ominous vibe for the rest of the film if it was real. And this is a conventional idea in real media thrillers in terms of tension building. It also makes seemingly innocent lyrics become dark and creepy, and if you rewatch the sequence after watching it the whole way through, the lyrics have a completely different interpretation than originally, which is much darker. The ways in which the audio of our opening sequence is similar to mainstream media and has conventions of a thriller film is the drone effect, as it's used in many horror or thriller genres in order to build the tension of the scenes.
No! No, no! No! Don't open that door! You're going to get all of us killed!
However, the use of soundtrack dissonance is not commonly used in films of this genre, but we thought it was an effective choice of music despite its uplifting tone, based on the lyrics and the creepy undertones. A use of soundtrack dissonance in mainstream media has been used before though, for example in the drama thriller Reservoir Dogs. There is a scene where the character of Mr. Blonde has a cop tied up in a chair and he's got a mask over his face, and Mr. Blonde is dancing around to Stuck in the Middle with You, and while that song is playing over the top of the scene, he cuts off the ear of the cop, and this is an example of soundtrack dissonance and the dark effect it has on a scene. Another example is from A Clockwork Orange, which is in fact a dystopian crime film. However, there's a scene in which the main character, Alex, and his gang have snuck into this rich couple's home, and he's attacking this couple and he's about to rape the woman, and while this is all happening he is singing the song Singing in the Rain, which is so disturbing for such a dark act to take place while he's singing that song. And this is also an influence for our choice of soundtrack dissonance. For the credits we used a font called Child Serial Killer, which looks like creepy, scrawly handwriting, which could be seen as the antagonist's handwriting. This font was similar to the style of David Fincher's Seven opening sequence, and that's what inspired us to use it, and this was effective in terms of emphasising the film's genre. It established the genre by using this creepy element to emphasise the dark nature of the film's plot. The editing and camera work of our opening sequence could not necessarily be compared to any examples from mainstream media, as we didn't really aim to base our creative choices of production off other films, and we stuck to fairly basic camera shots to maintain the flow of the sequence, and we didn't want to make it too fancy and all that. And we used dissolves between characters, and this effect has been used in some films, such as the ending scene of the thriller Donnie Darko. We felt that the use of the dissolve, much like the camera shots, helps the piece flow and brings the characters together rather than quick cuts. We also used cross-cutting, which is conventional with thriller films, and an example of this is in the thriller Inception, and that's an example of how we did use forms from a real media example in our own product. And I feel like we didn't necessarily challenge forms from other media products, but we mainly just developed our product from what we felt was most visually appealing and would work best for the theme and plot we were trying to present. Although we used similar elements such as cross-cutting rather than quick cuts, we used gradual dissolves, which are less common. We also challenged conventions by not using any dialogue or voiceover from a character in the opening sequence, which is usually used to introduce narrative elements or the main protagonist. An example of this is in the thriller No Country for Old Men. Ways in which our media product is conventional to the thriller genre is through character and narrative. In our opening sequence, we set it up to show character development and reveal the dark twist at the end, which introduces the main theme of the film. Firstly, the idea of a character watching, stalking someone is a common theme and narrative within some thriller films. Example of this is Jed Parry in Enduring Love and Alex in Fatal Attraction. Furthermore, a lot of thriller films are likely to feature a twist that catches the audience off guard or changes the previous narrative completely, and this is effective as it creates new plot lines and often makes the audience question what is happening. The build-up of tension that creates suspense at the end of the opening sequence is another convention we successfully used from thriller films, and as the build-up of scenes combined with the gradual sinister audio creates an eerie and creepy vibe that manages to release details and implications of the rest of the narrative without revealing the identity of the antagonist and making the audience question what is going on and what's going to occur later on in the plot. An example of a thriller film opening sequence that makes implications of the narrative without revealing an identity is in Seven. The sequence shows a montage of behaviours and evidence of murders to show the film is about a serial killer, but doesn't reveal to the audience who the antagonist is until later on in the plot, when the narrative has become more unravelled. The plot twist in House at the End of the Street is vaguely similar to our opening sequence by revealing that the character, in our case the anonymous man, is psychologically troubled. In House at the End of the Street, the twist is much darker and better thought out, but as we only created an opening sequence, later plot developments are obviously not shown, and what we came up with could potentially be built upon if we made the whole film. We decided to make our narrative and characters quite simple and generic to the genre, as it's easier to establish it to an audience than trying to create and develop intricate personalities and plots that the viewer may not understand. It's obviously easier to be more unconventional if we are making a larger section of the film, or the whole thing, but within a few minutes it's easier to stick to conventional elements that are similar to other media products. Although, as previously said, we didn't necessarily challenge the conventions of media products in our own sequence, but I think the paedophilic father-daughter element of our character's obsession, being quite taboo and a dark subject, challenges the stereotypical stalker movies such as The Boy Next Door, and this gives our film/opening sequence a fresh take on an otherwise typical thriller film. Overall, I think we had a successful balance of using conventional aspects in our thriller to make it authentic, such as the overall narrative and the use of the drone over the soundtrack, but also breaking in challenging conventions, such as by using contrasting lighting for each character. There are obviously more elements to our opening sequence that made it successful, but those are some of the prominent details in terms of conventional and unconventional aspects we incorporated into the sequence.